Hello and welcome to Unacademy, one-stop destination for civil services aspirants. From our childhood days, we have been looking at various different government documents, various different textbooks, and all of them have indicated that our coastline extends for roughly around 7,500 kilometers. Now, the recent findings and the recent studies have indicated that this is not the actual length of the coastline that India has. Indian coastline, in fact, extends for more than 11,000 kilometers. So, our understanding of what our coastal length was, that stands to be incorrect. And overall, as per our own official records, the extent of Indian coastline has increased by almost 50%. In this particular video, we are going to discuss that what accounts for this particular increase in the coastal length. Why do we experience this and why do we observe this? The classification of various states in terms of the length of the coastline that they have, the islands that have been counted, which were previously not thought of. And also, what will be the implication of this new count and this new calculation that we have arrived at? So, here, first of all, let us understand the context in which we are having the discussion. So, as I told you, till now, our overall calculation regarding the length of the coastline indicated that the coastal length of India was around 7,516 kilometer. But this was based upon the calculation which was done in a very conventional method and a manner which included manual interventions, which was done almost in the era of the 1970s. But latest GIS based mapping systems and a better and a more micro scale level of understanding has given us a clue that actually the coastal length of India is close to around 11,100 kilometer, marking an increase of 48%. Now, what are the reasons? Why do we experience this increase? And why is it that our overall measurements were earlier wrong? So let us talk about the reasons for them. So, reasons broadly can be categorized into two parts. One is the case of measurement. Now, when we talk about measurement, here again, how do we measure and the scale of measurement? So, both of them have changed as compared to the previous calculation. So, here, the method of measurement. And the second is basically the scale of measurement. What they are, we will touch upon them with the help of illustration and images of the coastline. I will help you understand that what do we mean by this. And then secondly, the reason for extended coastal length is inclusion of many islands. Now, earlier, when the calculation was carried out in the 1970s, many of the islands were not counted because with the conventional calculation, these islands were not even visible, and many of them included the tidal islands, and they did not count for the human intervention and the human actions overall in terms of land reclamation, coastal reclamation. That has also increased the coastline. How? Let us talk about it. So, first of all, the method of measurement. The method has changed. Earlier, it was manual and a conventional method. Now you have satellite based GIS method mapping. So there is a greater minute detail which is captured. And then comes the scale of measurement. Earlier, the scale which was used was much larger. For example, let me simplify it for you. Let's suppose you hold a 1 kilometer long scale, right? Or rather, 110 kilometer or 100 kilometer long scale, where each of the demarcations indicate 1 kilometer. Now, in that measurement, you will always miss out the small variations in the coastline or in any particular place. Let's suppose the coastal region is somewhat like this. Now, when viewed from above, this will be viewed something like a straight line. Whereas when you zoom it in at a much more minute level, let's suppose at a meter level, then you will come across multiple different inundations. How? Let us take a look at it with the help of illustration. Now, this is the map that you see of India's long coastline. extending from Gujarat in the west all the way till the region of West Bengal and the islands including Andaman and Lakshadweep, Andaman Nicobar Island Group and Lakshadweep Group of Islands. Now, I want you to observe the shape of the coastline, particularly across the Maharashtra coast. Now, if you observe the region of the Maharashtra coastline, you will observe almost a straight line here. So, the perception that you will get is that Maharashtra coastline is very straight. What if I were to zoom into this? Now, if I were to zoom into this area, look at the zoomed in image. Does that represent a straight line? So, if I retrace my pen here again, does it indicate a kind of a straight line across Malvan coast? Malvan coast, I hope you are aware, is a kind of a marine protected area where you have unique biodiversity. Now, even by your naked eyes, you will be able to come to a conclusion that this is not a straight line. This is something which is slightly protruded outwards, isn't it? But when we were taking a look at this image, it appeared to be straight. What if I zoom in further? Then what? Then you will observe, obviously. Now, compare this. Let's suppose this is something that we consider as image 1. Now, in image 1, this is the distance which will be apparent for the coastal area. In image 2, the distance would slightly increase because you are counting for the protrusions as well. Now, what if I zoom in further? Now, when I zoom in further, even that protrusion is not uniform. You would observe that now, if I were to measure the coastal length, I will have to measure this area, I will have to measure this area, I will have to measure this one, and this one as well. So, overall, the distance keeps on increasing as you zoom in. And in the larger image, everything appears to be smoothened out because you are zoomed out. So, that is the perspective of the highly magnified scale. And due to this highly magnified scale, we are experiencing an increase in the length that is measured across the coastal area. So, the encapsulation of this is basically the difference in scale. So, earlier, when we would talk about the coastal measurement, the scale of measurement would be 1 is to 45 lakh or small. But now, the scale is much more zoomed in, that is 1 is to 2.5 lakh. Right? So don't get confused in numbers. Just think about it. The earlier example that we talked about, that let's suppose I have a 10-kilometer scale, kilometer wise divisions. Now it will only measure larger distances, it will ignore the smaller anomalies. On the other hand, if you have a meter scale, 1 meter scale, it will be able to measure the centimeter ways and also the centimeter kind of changes which are there. If you have, let's suppose, a smaller scale of 15 centimeter, the plastic rulers that you have, you will be able to measure much more clearly. So, like that, the scale has basically zoomed in, the scale has magnified, and as a consequence, we are able to look at the various indicators. Also, the method of measurement has changed. Earlier, you had conventional and manual calculations, and now we are resorting to GIS software, which is able to capture the irregularities of the landmass much more accurately. But also important to note is the inclusion of islands. Now, many of the islands, particularly the offshore islands, that is away from the coastal area, now many of the islands had been left out in previous calculations, obviously, the matter of scale in itself, but also many of the islands are tidal in nature, right? They are tidal in nature, that is, during the high tides, these islands might have been submerged, and during the low tides, when the water level goes down, that is when these islands are visible. So they form the coastline nonetheless. So, this is one of the influences due to the tidal influences. Another reason is human factors or anthropogenic factors. Anthropogenic, which means what? Let's suppose earlier the coastal area was somewhat like this. Let's assume. Now, there has been newer settlement and expansion of infrastructure in this area also. Like this, infrastructure has expanded. So, this area is also your landmass now. Now, while the earlier calculation of the coastline would be restricted to this region. But now the coastline that you will measure will also have to count in reclaimed areas. So, such kind of events or such kind of eventualities have been observed in the region like Mumbai, in the region of the metropolitan coastal areas, in the areas like Tiruvananthapuram, etc. This is a reality which has been observed along with the islands. For example, even in the Andaman Nicobar coastline, anthropogenic interventions have increased the length of some of the island regions as well. So, thereby, the measurement has changed. So, there are three reasons: scale of measurement, method of measurement, and inclusion of islands. Now, this exposes what is known as the coastline paradox. What is this coastline paradox? Now, you see, in the 1970s, the measurement was close to around 7,500 kilometer, isn't it? Now, today, the newer measurements have indicated it is 11,098 kilometer. Now, is that the real measurement? Is that true? And is that absolutely accurate? No. You would have understood by now that if we zoom in further, this can increase further. So, the greater that we zoom in, it will indicate a greater amount of increase as well. So, where do we stop? Because the anthropogenic activities and the human activities of land reclamation, construction of infrastructure, this will keep on happening. So, particularly in the coastal areas, the countries they face a paradox about what to consider as the absolute scale and when to stop. And also the paradox is, so first of all, the major paradox is what scale to consider. That is a major paradox. Second paradox is how do we include the islands, particularly the tidal island. Should they be included or should they be ignored? Tidal islands, as in where the high tide can hide the island, can submerge the island, and the low tide can expose. The third will be human inter- because human interventions will keep on increasing. The human construction or the anthropogenic constructions will keep on happening, isn't it? So, thereby, when do you update it? How periodically do you update it? And then the factor of coastal erosion. Now, many regions, particularly in the eastern part of the country and the eastern coastline, they are experiencing coastal erosion as well. So, coastal erosion, when it is carried out, so for example, let's suppose the earlier coastline was shaped like this. Now, coastal erosion in this area has eroded this much portion. So, the newer coastline that you have is somewhat like now. Which one do you consider? Obviously, after the coastal erosion, this length has slightly increased, isn't it? So that will keep on increasing the length of the coastline. So, how regularly do you update this data? What are the factors that you consider? And the paradox is the more detailing that you get into, the longer the coastline appears to get. This is the coastal paradox. So, in a nutshell, greater the measurement, greater the measurement, greater the length, longer the coastline. Okay? Now, here the numbers which have emerged after the new measurements, they indicate, first of all, that is something which is relevant for your prelims perspective. Now, after the newer measurement, the numbers which have come out is basically the state-wise exposure to the coastline or the state-wise length of the coastline. There you will find that the greatest length of the coastline is present in the island group of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. That is close to around 3,000 kilometers. Amongst the states, the largest coastline is with Gujarat because of the indentions provided by Gulf of Cambay, the region of the Kutch area. In all those, have an elongated coastline. So, for your prelims purpose, you should be aware about the ascending and the descending order of the length of the coastline, at least in the case of the states. The longest coastline, keep it in mind, Andaman Nicobar. Obviously, so many different islands are there. Then you will have Lakshadweep, which is very, very small. So that is why the length of the coastline there is not very high. Amongst the states, the largest coastline is with Gujarat. Amongst the states, the shortest coastline is with, okay, amongst the states. I'm not talking about the UTs here. Now, after this, even the islands, the number of islands as we talked about, that count has changed as compared to the previous calculation. So offshore, onshore islands, they have indicated, the newer count has indicated that overall the number of islands that we have is close to around 1400 islands, large and small included. So in total, we have 1389 islands. Out of them, 1298 are offshore. Many of them are tidal and many of them are temporary. Well, but then this is a reliable data indicated by the Surveyor General of India. Now, what are the implications of this study? Why should we be concerned about it, first of all? Will there be any impact in the international order that India has got 11,000-kilometer coastline? Earlier, it had only 7,500 kilometers, so we need to give more amount of importance to India? No. Internationally, when it comes to, let's suppose, the extent of your territorial waters, when it comes to the extent of EEZ, there will be no change. Why? Because the extent of exclusive economic zone, etc., that is done based upon the line of your shoreline, right? So if the coastline is somewhat like this is the water, that this is what you consider the shoreline. Okay, so that is basically where from their region you consider the area of the exclusive economic zone or territorial water. So this does not change. So internationally, nothing changes. But at a micro level, your management of the coastline will change. The amount of money that you have devolved or you have allocated for, let's suppose, preventing coastal erosion, that will change because now you have a greater idea about the coastal regions. Now you will be able to micromanage your coastal ecosystem conservation efforts. That changes. You will be able to more or in a better manner able to manage these coastal ecosystems like the reef ecosystems, the fragile coastline. Then, when it comes to even, let's suppose, the security purpose, there the resource allocation will change because when the coastline has got a lot of intentions, then there is deployment and the requirement of greater security, isn't it? For example, let's suppose the coastline is like this. If I deploy security forces here, my work is done. But if the same coastline is somewhat like this on a zoomed in level, then just a mere deployment in this place is not sufficient. I need to deploy security in these regions as well. So the security apparatus needs to be galvanized. Coastal regulation zone, which follows the distance from the coastline and the shoreline for the CRZ1, the CRZ2, the CRZ3 categories, 3A, 3B, all of these, they will also change. Many of the creeks and estuaries which were ignored earlier now will be counted. So that also changes the CRZ norm. So the construction permits that will be required. Many of the regions will now come under CRZ norms, which were earlier not there. So there are multiple changes on the administrative, management, security, coastal level. But on international level, not much of a change. We will also be able to micromanage the various disasters like coastal erosion and thereby have a better ecosystem. So that basically is what is required to be understood in this particular topic. I hope we have understood the implication of it. So overall, in a nutshell, what have we discussed? India's coastline, which was earlier calculated in the 1970s with the basic conventional method, was close to around 7,516 kilometer. That has increased to 11,098 kilometer due to various reasons, scale of management, as well as the case of islands being counted. So, if you have liked this particular content, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye.